You may want to see this. So as we'll just record as we move forward to share with others as we go forward. So yeah, so hip hop and jazz, a nice kind of fusion there, right? And
yeah, exactly.
As I was looking for, I guess that was on the soundtrack for Mario Kart or Mario Brothers or something was the soundtrack it was on, I think. So
oh, is that right?
90s, yes, as it pulled it forward. So good. So great. So Dan, it's great. Again, great to have you here. So just as we kind of get started, just kind of riff and see where you want to go. We'll take the jazz piece as it goes here today. And we've done some prep, I know, but also just to see where it goes today. But just kind of reflect maybe why did you choose to be on this journey, of convening and doing the things that you're doing? Anything you want to share about that would be great.
Yeah, I grew up here in Cincinnati, and both my parents were, they migrated to Ohio from Jim Crow South. So they left that like 6 million other African Americans between 1915 and 1970. And so they met here, and I realized I never would have existed had they not fled the Jim Crow South. I mean, my father left when he was 12 years old. So that was in the 20s. My mother came here in 1937. And so I was born years later. And so I was raised here, and, my upbringing, neither of my parents graduated high school or anything like that. I was not on a college track in high school. All they wanted me to do was to stay out of trouble, because trouble living in an urban environment for a kid like me was kind of a death sentence. It was just a downhill pattern of life from there. And so they really just wanted me to be a good person. And that's what's really paid off for me. I had the good fortune of being 6'6" and having 40-inch arms. So I played basketball, and that was my pathway to college. And so I graduated as a teacher. I never taught until years later. I became a probation officer, and I worked for the local county government. My whole thing back then was, growing up, all the men in my life, including my father, who worked in a steel mill, they wore suits and white shirts and shiny shoes and nice suits, right? And so that's what I wanted to do. That's the kind of work I wanted to have. And so being a probation officer, I could dress like a lawyer. And it ended up being a really good situation for me. So I really love that work. And also I was kind of raised in that old veteran era of, you get a good job, you stay with it, and you retire. And that's pretty much what I did. But I grew in the organization. For 25 or 30 years, I was a leader. And I really got interested in leadership. I actually became a trainer in the county division, training leaders in frontline leadership. And while doing that, I would try a lot of things I was training them. And I discovered a lot of those things didn't work. It didn't feel good. It was hard. I had a few experiences back then, though, that told me that something different was possible. And it was just by accident that I discovered two things. One, I rearranged a large meeting room where I'd have 70 people in there for meetings. And I put the tables in a herringbone kind of a configuration. And I did that because I felt like people needed to be able to talk to each other and see each other. And it felt good. On another occasion, I gave people a chance to pick topics for the meeting, which was radical, right? And I noticed a few people stepped up and picked topics, and they had high levels of motivation for years after that. So I saw the impact that them having the freedom to choose topics was inspiring to them. But that's about all I could get from it until I retired and I met Peter Block, who lived here in Cincinnati. And Peter tells a story about And it was about the time, it was in 2005 that I met Peter. And that was the time he was doing the research and nearly ready to write the community book. And he tells a story, right, about his wife saying to him, hey, why don't you try some of this stuff that you're writing about? And so that's where it happened for me. He decided he would do that. And I had a great opportunity to connect with him and connect with the work. And that was the beginning for me. That's where all this stuff started to make sense to me when I got with Peter. And I learned that, you know, basically all change is linguistic. And that made so much sense to me. And so practicing with Peter, practicing the 6 conversations, 3 of us, Peter, his assistant, and myself, we would go out around Cincinnati and we would host 2 3-hour community conversations. And that's where we had a chance to practice the 6 conversations in communities. And from that, Peter wrote the book. From there, my work using these processes started to take off. And so that's kind of how I got started. And came into Finneytown School District about 5.5 years ago. And that was the beginning for me of working with an organization for a long period of time, using these processes and being able to see the benefits to the leaders there and the freedom that they found in their leadership experience. Because the one thing I know about leadership that I personally experienced was pain. It's very painful. When you it was very, very painful. And so I think for Finneytown and the leaders, what really moved them was the experience of freedom as leaders. And it eliminated the pain they felt, and they found courage to dive into this way of leadership. And so it's been 5 years doing that work.
Beautiful. As you reflect down on particularly on those 5 years, and I know your journey has started before that. We can go back a bit if we need to, but in particular those 5 years, I think there's many groups within the education system. I know we have the teachers, the administrators, the students, all these pieces. As you've integrated and talked to and brought those different, sometimes at odds, people together, what has surprised you, or what have you learned? And in many ages, this is a unique piece too, because you bring students in as well. Would you like to reflect on the different diverse groups that are coming together for this sense of freedom?
Yeah, they when I first started, they were introducing a new structure for the district. It's a small suburban district. So there's only about 1,500 students in the district. So 50 staff members. And in the high school, there are 2 buildings now. In the high school, they wanted to roll out a new structure for how the student body was arranged. So rather than having kids arranged by age and grade, they created a house system. And so within the house system, they have grades 7 through 12 in a house, and they have 6 houses. And those houses, those kids stay in the same house. And the idea is that those kids will develop relationships over the time that they're there, being connected with a house. And so they wanted to roll that out, introduce it, and they had already decided they wanted to do it. And that's when they learned about me and my work, and they invited me in to help them hold a large staff meeting to introduce the house system. So we got together and we planned it, designed things. They came up with a theme, and their theme was, how can we be more than a school? That was the theme. And so that kind of started the movement toward looking beyond what happens in the classroom into the whole system. And so that was the beginning, Jeff, of the whole system being brought into the room. So for that very first meeting, we invited parents, we invited community members, along with the entire high school staff, to talk about this idea of how we can be more than a school. And so that was the beginning of it. And so that has, and then shortly after that, they discovered another process called restorative practices, which again, it's like the 6 conversations. It's a narrative practice. That's what I call it. So restorative practice is a way of communicating with kids and resolving conflicts and issues by using more restorative language than the kind of language that really, kills kids, really. So that took them to another level of understanding the impact of language on day-to-day practices. And and so that's stretched out even further than what's happening in the classrooms. Now it's out into the communities. And so these same practices and shifted narratives and relationships are occurring in everything they do. Just this week, I was at a Springfield Township Business Network meeting. It was hosted at the new elementary school, and they had these 25 or so business people in a circle. Just like we started today, we broke out with connection before content. And the school superintendent hosted the meeting and facilitated the breakout session in the small group conference. We're here, people connecting with people they don't know and talking about the things they have in common. And so they're and they believe that their role as leaders is to connect the whole system to itself. And that's just connecting one person at a time to somebody they don't know, strangers to strangers. That's their form of hospitality, is connecting strangers to strangers and enabling them to share their stories with each other. And so that's just happening on an ongoing basis with community members, within the school, among the staff members, among the students and faculty. And so that's their work. They're trying to connect the whole system.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think as we said in the introduction too, I think, Dan, and what continues to fascinate me about the work that you're doing is utilizing the hosting piece and the questions and utilizing that with elementary through high school students. So it's just can you share a little bit about how has it been adjusted, or how have you integrated this, and what have you seen as some of the impacts and maybe the stories from the actual students at all ages that begin to get
There's a funny story. Yeah, Jeff, you kind of broke up a little there. I don't know if it's me or what it was, but I have a little story to share about that. There was a team of specialists, and it was a new team, and they were working on restorative practices and project-based learning. And they were basically consultants in the district, but did not look at their role that way. And so one day I stopped into their office, and they were all kind of sitting around and trying to figure out what to do and planning. How are we going to get people engaged? People wouldn't respond to the little trainings they offered and different things. And they were trying to figure that out. So we kind of sat down and talked about things and got them to look at their specialist role as a consultant. And so now they do. They look at themselves as consultants. And one of the projects that came out of that idea, when they realized, okay, we're going to go out and we're going to create partners. And so 2 of the guys went out and found some elementary, a 4th grade teacher, a 5th grade teacher, and a 1st grade teacher. Formed a partnership. We all got together and decided, okay, we're going to use some small group processes, and we're going to use storytelling. That's what and so we called ourselves story catchers as adults. And there were 5 of us, counting the teacher. And so we planned it out, and we went into the first grade classroom, and the teacher introduced us as guests, and we're all story catchers. The teacher facilitated the process. We broke out into small groups with an adult and 3 first graders. And we asked questions. We did storytelling. And near the end of it, this was last year, near the end of it, one of the questions to them was, it was a possibility conversation. And we asked them, what excites you about second grade, thinking about going into second grade? And the other one was a dissent conversation. What worries you? So what excites you and what is it that worries you, to first graders? And they responded, positively to thinking about going into second grade, but they were worried about being bullied. At least the kids in my group, and they said the same thing in other groups. So the first graders can get in the conversations. They can follow the protocols. There was one kid in a group, and we were sitting on the floor, and he was crawling between all of our legs. And he was kind of a special needs kid, and some of these kids have an adult that stays with them throughout the day so they can be mainstreamed and not isolated because they have some developmental issues. And this one kid, his name was Gino, and he was crawling between people's legs, and he had an adult with him. And she tried to control him. I said, no, let him go. Just let him crawl between our legs. And so on one occasion, I said, one girl was talking, and I said, hey, Gino, ask her, why is that important to you? Which is one of the 6 conversation prompts, right? And Gino stopped, and he looked at her, and he asked her the question. So while he was crawling through our legs, he was listening. He was engaged. And so that was pretty impactful on me, because I think the adult with that kid was able to see him in a different way. You know how we talk about not being helpful? Well, her job is to be helpful, control him. And so she let go of that control. And I think she learned a little bit about what's possible with him.
Mm. Beautiful.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of lessons every day that come out of Peter's work. The small group protocols and the conversations are practiced every day by everybody there.
Mm. Great. Yes, I'm curious, Dan, I love hearing the stories with the kids and the impact. It's beautiful work. I'm curious, what has surprised you the most as you've been on this journey, whether specifically at Finneytown or overall with the small group piece? What's been the most surprising thing to you?
I think it's the generative nature of the design elements. And by that, I mean, I had an experience maybe 5 weeks ago where I go into a meeting. It used to be there for a long time. All these large group meetings were Dan Joyner meetings. That's what they called them. And I accepted that, but after a while, I thought they were kind of getting off the hook. They were a little concerned about it, so they could blame me if it didn't go well. But what I experienced a few weeks ago was, again, going in, trying to be helpful at the beginning of a large opening day meeting, the whole district faculty and staff. And I wanted to help. And one of the assistant superintendents said to me, no, I got this. And she just gave me a piece of paper, and I just felt like I was no longer useful. I just went off and got ready to do what they wanted me to do. But I told the superintendent about that, and she kind of chuckled. She said, you know what? We're all going through that. Many people are saying to us as we try to guide them along and make sure we do these things properly, that we spend time designing and execute everything properly, and we follow up properly. And many people in the district are saying to those leaders, no, we got this. So to me, that's saying it's spreading. That's what I mean by it being generative. Now, it's not 100% of the teachers are using these methods, because we want to see those classrooms in circles. and kids being connected and community building happening in every single classroom. I think maybe 50% of the teachers are doing it actively, but that's a pretty good number, and that may be enough to tip things. So we'll see how it goes this year.
Nice.
But it's improving, increasing every year. So it is a very generative way of approaching work, a generative way of being together. The speech patterns and the language sticks with people when they experience it, and they can see the difference, the distinction. It sticks. So it's just practice. It's just practicing as often as possible.
Beautiful. Good. And then maybe from a descent doubt kind of conversation too, what's and we've talked about, the dominant narrative of control and predictability and those type of things. How are some of those, traditional ways of administering and running and dealing with the school system? How are those coming into the process? How do you continue to, keep the possibilities and hope of an alternative narrative? Just curious how that continues. I'm sure it ebbs and flows, but what's been your experience with the dominant coming in, dealing with it?
Yeah, our mantra is to stay small, stay slow. So when things get a little edgy and a little doubt starts to creep in, stay small. So invite 1 or 2 people in and start to grow the idea or the project from 1 or 2 people. They had a board meeting a few weeks ago, school board meeting. That was a special meeting. It wasn't the traditional monthly, regular monthly school board meeting, but it was a special meeting that the superintendent was able to get the school board president to agree to. And 3 out of the 5 school board members showed up for this 2-hour special meeting. And it was in circle, which is really different from the traditional meeting. And it was a story sharing, kind of same thing we did with the first graders. It was all about story sharing, where it was set up for the school board members and the community people, whoever came, to learn about what was going on inside the building. And so it was an opportunity for them to kind of share these processes and how we're using them, and actually give the school board members and community members an opportunity to experience it. And like every meeting, connection before content happened with that school board. And it was very, very, very powerful. At the end, I remember the school board president saying, "How can we do more of this?" But a week later, they were back to their regular school board meeting with, everybody in rows and school board up front. So that's what I mean by start small, stay small. So if they really try to change the way the school board meets, that's probably not gonna happen. But I think slowly over time, they may be able to gradually create that shift. But we'll see.
That's great. And then leaning into some possibilities for you, Dan. What do you hope to see as you continue this journey that you're on and the work that you're doing?
How we say we want to kind of be a collaborative consultant. We want people to be able to do what I'm doing or what we're doing after we're gone. But I'm finding in this system that, man, the work as we drill down, and like I said, they're in a school, if change happens 1 room at a time, there are a whole lot of rooms in schools. So there's a whole lot of work to be done. So as long as they'll have me there, I don't think this work will ever stop. And I love the idea of 1 room at a time, because that really kind of gets you in a position to stay small and work in those rooms with teachers and students. And so that's what I see, Jeff. I just think that the work will continue, and we'll find new ways to do it, and new places to do it. yeah, I'm involved now in a project that I'm kind of taking it on myself, and it's involving a couple of senior residential centers in the neighborhood and students. And we haven't pulled this together yet, but we're gonna create a greeting card business where we're gonna create greeting cards, and we're gonna do handwritten notes back and forth between the seniors and the senior adults and the students.
Oh, beautiful.
And we're going to try to do handwritten notes from student to student.
Yeah.
The staff has really got it there. They've got it down. They write lots of handwritten notes. I mean, I've got a stack of notes here this thick, and it just makes you feel so good. We got a little structure for those notes, you know. So the whole idea is and it's based on gifts and generosity, right? Again, playing into the principles. The note has 3 elements. The first element is when you observe somebody doing something that's a gift to somebody else or to you, or an act of generosity, the idea is to handwrite them a note as soon as possible, stating what you observed them doing. And the second part of it is to state how what you observed made you feel. So it's an emotional element too. And then the last part is how what they did contributes to the good of the whole. And so just those 3 elements make an awfully powerful communication with somebody, one that is treasured. I mean, there are people, and I experienced this, I did this way back in my days before I even started doing this work. But one of the things I noticed, and it's still happening in the school, is that these people, they save these notes. They've got them on their bulletin boards because they mean that much to them. So it's just kind of reinforcing what we're trying to do there in a very, very meaningful way. So I'd love to see what that'll do if we can stretch that out into the community and the seniors can connect with the kids.
Yeah, beautiful. There is so much power and beauty in the written word that I think sometimes we lose the sense in our technology efficiency based world that we're in. But those written pieces for all ages, I think is just a great example of the gift, Dan, as it's going. So, okay, so a couple quick things that were in the chat. Then we'll go to breakouts to kind of get us some conversations on what struck us. We'll come back together for some interactions. Finneytown, there was a question. Finneytown is in Cincinnati, Ohio. So just, is it part of Cincinnati itself, Dan, or is it a suburb, or I'm not sure.
It's a first ring suburb.
First ring suburb north of Cincinnati.
Older suburb. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. And then just one you mentioned with some of the work there, maybe an example of restorative language in practice. You mentioned that earlier. That was just a question or that popped up in the chat a little bit ago around the restorative piece. So the question was, can you give an example of restorative language in practice as it ties into what you're doing?
Yeah. I saw an example the other day. I was there. This year, they're trying to hold in the high school, they're trying to hold the kids more accountable for cell phone usage, following the rules, not roaming the halls, between bells. And that's hard because a lot of adults the kids will wear you down and you'll just let them go. You'll ignore it. And I learned working with juvenile delinquents, never ignore minor transgressions. Have to be consistent with it. And so I noticed the other day that a few people, it was lunchtime and it was junior high kids, and some of the teachers were being consistent with that. They were not ignoring kids trying to walk off and wander away. So one teacher tried to intervene and with a kid, and she did, and she solved it, whatever it was. But when she came back, she said, I forget how the conversation came up. But anyway, she talked about the interaction with the kid. And this is a restorative practice thing. And Lee Rush is on here. He'll know this. But one of the things she said to the kid was how him yelling at her made her feel. And so that's kind of a restorative thing where that emotional piece, just like in the written note, how we want to include that emotional piece in there, that she was able to communicate that to that boy at that point. And he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize." He apologized to her, and then he complied. He went and did what he was supposed to do. So it's that kind of language, what you say to kids. So you see two kids get into a little spat, and it's like in sports, the last person is the one that gets to foul. So teachers will say, "Well, Tommy, why are you hitting her?" And so rather than saying that and accusing him of something and causing him to be defensive, you would say in restorative practice, "What happened?" You would ask him, "Hey, what happened?" So you give him a chance to talk about it. Maybe something really led up to that action that the teacher didn't know about. So that would be an example of language, a shift in language.
Beautiful. All right. So what I want to do is we do have a larger group today, which is wonderful. And so I just want to we'll just open some breakout rooms. And what I just have you do in your conversation, a breakout room is what's working on you right now, and or what are you curious about as you've listened to Dan share his journey. In this practice, we don't want to get into the typical Q&A, but we want to interact when we come back together. But just as Dan has shared some of his journey, what are you curious about, and maybe what's working on you as you listen in and the impact it's having for you. So we'll move into our breakouts. I know a few folks have had to jump off and jump on. So thanks, folks who have been here and with us as we move forward. We'll move into some breakouts. And what's working on you? What are you curious about? Set the timer. Let's see. We got a few minutes. We got plenty of about 8 minutes or so in the breakout, and then we'll come back together and do some interactions together with Dan as we go forward. So open the breakout rooms. What curiosities are coming up, and what's working on you as you listen to Dan today? Welcome back, everyone. I hear nobody came back early, and I heard we interrupted some meaningful conversations, which meant you were engaged. So I'm glad you're able to engage with some new folks. So yes, what we'd like to do now is just kind of open it up to anybody who would like to share what you're curious about, any impacts, have some interaction with Dan in particular, if you'd like to, on his journey and how that's kind of impacted you today. So questions, comments, insights that you'd like to share. If you'd raise your hand, either your physical hand or your electronic hand, we can kind of manage through the process as we go forward. So who would like to kind of share something that's working on them, or they're curious as we listen to Dan today? Yes, Martin.
I think in our group, and it was clearly with me too, we were very interested in the language and the use of the language, the restorative language. And we saw it from different perspectives. And my perspective, and I'm doing a lot of work looking at the neurobiology of how we actually are safe and how we get to a place of socially connected with other people. And the language and the questions we use are right on in terms of what happened versus really assuming that there's something wrong with the person and starting to want to fix them. It changes the dynamic, and it also allows the person to get to a place of safety just simply by the language we're using. And it also helps them in terms of co-regulate with somebody else. So they're automatically communicating in terms of their safety with other people and bringing people to safety by the language that they use is just amazing. And I think what's interesting, and just looking at a lot more of the work around neurobiology, is you can take them to a place of safety when they're dysregulated or they're mobilized or fearful, and helping them to choose where they're going to be at home in their own psychology. And I think that's, the language is incredibly important. So Dan, I really thank you for that.
Smart.
I'm sorry, who just spoke about language? My screen was covered over.
That was Martin, Fatima. So Martin.
Martin?
Yeah. Yes.
Martin, I thank you. I would love to have further conversations with you about language and its impact on how people and human beings interact. I don't see Martin here. Okay. I'm talking to you, Martin. Okay, I see you now.
Great. Thanks, Fatima. Yeah. More
welcome.
the request to follow up. Absolutely. Martin put his contact information there in the chat room. So Martin's doing some wonderful work, I know, Indigenous folks and others around the world. So beautiful. Lee, I see your hand up. Hello.
Yeah, well, just a couple of real quick things. Dan, there was no way I was going to miss your talk today. I just love you. I think you're just well, one thing I wanted to say, if your parents set out to create a good person, they far exceeded that, number one. Number two, I'm no longer going to say my 6'6" friend. I'm going to say my friend with 40-inch arms. That's a good one. I was trying to think, is each arm 40 inches? No, he must, yeah, each arm. That's funny. I just love your stories, Dan. I've worked with you a couple times in person and virtually, and I always come away feeling like I'm a better facilitator, honestly, just for being exposed to your style. And I just love hearing your story about Finneytown. For those that don't know, when Dan shared about the superintendent with the new elementary building, I never saw a superintendent talk to a large community gathering and stop in the middle of her talk and had people gather in small groups and talk about why it was important they were there. And then they processed it, and the man walked around like with a microphone and asked people what struck them. So to see that kind of thing in real life in a school, and I work with schools my whole career too, I love the mantra of stay small, go slow. I'm gonna keep remembering that. That's one thing I really want to take away from today. And again, just great to hear you and Jeff interact today, and look forward to our continued relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
Beautiful. Tina, I see your hand up.
I want to ditto what Lee said, Dan. I was not going to miss today's group either. And I was struck, I think near the beginning of when you were speaking about starting, the work with the school district and the community, about leaders. One thing that bothered them, or that they felt was not enough freedom. I think I'm paraphrasing, and that strikes me as a follower or someone who's not a leader would, unless you were having, I'm guessing, these important sort of conversations with them. I'm thinking most leaders would never reveal that. There's this, underlings have this idea that, oh, well, they have all the freedom, they can do whatever they want. And hearing you say that, it puts a spin on it. It's an inversion of how we think, and I guess I loved hearing that there was that sort of depth of conversation, and that leaders were revealing, where I don't know how, I'm just babbling now, but it sounds like one of the really foundational things of getting to know people and to establish the community where you're working.
Great.
Yeah, Tina, was really freedom from the pain, The pain.
Yes,
we
the pain of
experience.
leadership. Yes.
Yeah, the
Uh-huh.
pain we experience. Yeah.
Freedom and freedom to choose, I think, is the other key piece that goes with that as well, Tina. So beautiful.
Yeah.
John
Thank you.
Saunders. Hello, John. Welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, what struck me and what sort of questions got aroused in me is, how do you do this work? How do you get started practically? And like, I have some situations where I want to do exactly this kind of work. And what does it look like to grow? And, you know, obviously I have the community book. I've read it. I use it, but maybe the only way is to get doing it is to get doing it and for practice. Any words of wisdom, Dan?
Yeah, start small. I mean, do like what Peter did in writing the community book. His wife said, "Hey, why don't you try it?" And that's what he did. He started small. I mean, they named a group, a small group, you know. And so 2 other people in a conversation, and it grows from there. And that's our practice, is to, you know, invite the first ring of people. You get together and you hold up and you commit to the work. The invitation process is critical. So mastering invitation is important. So we work hard at that. But the idea is that the first ring of people will invite the next ring of people, and then the next ring. And that's how it grows.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that, I think that has continued, thanks, Dan, in this work with this community, and as this community grows, the invitation piece is such a big shift from a mindset where we used to do mandate. And I'm concerned, what if I invite people and nobody shows up, or one person shows up? And what I've learned from Dan and Peter and others is whoever shows up are the right folks to be there at that point in time. And that piece will expand and contract as the organism that it is. But invitation is such a shift, at least for me personally, away from the dominant narrative into a choice invitation. So wonderful. Great. Sarah, I see your hand as well, and we'll begin to wrap things up. So
I'll be quick. First, Dan, I want to thank you because you've given me hope. We're living in such a messed up world, as I said to our little group, where communication has totally broken down, and it's hard to teach a dog new tricks, but you're starting with the puppies. And that really gives me a lot of hope. And as you said, this little guy who was in grade 1, like, he just got it like that. And so I thank you for that. And the other thing is just sharing where I've been with this process, because I'm not well practiced, but I wrote a book last year called I Choose Love, with the goal of creating communities of love in the world. And I've started giving workshops around love. And I have referred to the 6 conversations constantly. So I've kind of jumped in. I'm bumbling my way along, but each time it does get better and richer and a little bit easier. So thank you. I really appreciated hearing your story today.
Thank you, Sarah. And that's so true, Sarah. That was my experience too. You know, I just stumbled along, and it wasn't as bad as I thought, you know, and it got better and better and easier and easier, and you'll get there. So
Yeah.
you're doing it the right way. And I want to, you remind me of a story with Gino, the little boy, the little first grader I was telling you about. So on the last day there with the first graders, the teacher had the first graders create little cards, handmade little first grader cards for us. And what she told them was to write a card to the person, you know, to anybody you want to, from the story catcher group. And so right away, when I heard her say that, I said, oh my, I'm not going to get any cards because they don't know me. You know, they know these other guys because they're teachers, you know. And so the kids started giving, you know, they had these handmade cards and they were giving them out. And so I ended up getting 2 cards. And one of them was from Gino. And on the way Gino signed the card, he had a picture of 4 people. And those 4 people, stick people, they were holding hands. And 3 of them were little, and 1 of them was really tall. So he had personalized it for me. I just, I got it here somewhere.
That's beautiful. You were definitely known, Dan.
Yeah. There it is. I don't know if you can see that, but that's I don't know if you guys can see that.
Yeah, it's a little bit blue. Back it up a little bit.
No, you can see it.
Yeah.
Bring it down a little bit.
Down?
There you go.
And move it over. Yeah, there you
There
go.
you go.
See it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That should be your
There's
logo on
those-
your website, Dan. I love it.
There's those
Yeah,
40,
that was
there's those
sweet.
40-inch arms, Dan, that are coming out. For
Yeah,
us.
that's right.
All right. Well, beautiful. Well, thank you, folks. We are toward the end of our conversation. Continue to work with each other. And thank you, Sarah. Sarah's, I think, a great example. She was invited to join us and help us with some graphics and some things in the past. And she's continued to stay and written a book. It's a beautiful book. If you haven't had a chance to get it, she gifted one to me and I've looked through it many times. So continue to do the work, small, slow. That's how we do the things in the world, folks, and appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, Dan, for not only just sharing today with us, but for your commitment in the work you're doing with the youth and the education of the world in Finneytown. And those folks will be changed for life as we do that. So thank you, folks. We'll be doing this again next month, October 28th. Stay tuned for our next storyteller conversation. If any of you would like to share your story or have some ideas of some folks who would want to share stories about how they're convening, I think hopefully Dan would say it's mainly painless. We work with you to do that, but the more stories we can tell, how small, how big, has impact on all that we're doing. And it inspires me as I look at all your faces and nods and affirmations as we're in this world that's really crazy, and it's been crazy and it's getting crazier. But this is a time it's refreshing for me to see the wonderful world and work that everyone is doing. So we'll share a link, Sarah. If you want to share a link, Sarah, to the work in the chat here about to find your book, and we can also put that out in the LinkedIn community. If you have not found us by our LinkedIn community, please go out and join us. Structure of Belonging. The LinkedIn group is kind of how we're trying to keep some things together here. So Sarah has put that a book. So sarahgraphics.com, Amazon, and what's the title of the book, Sarah? I Choose Love. So I personally want to experience more love in this world. So thank you for Sarah for your gift of that, and every one of you. You're all our gifts. You bring inspiration to many folks, myself included. So with that, we will say adieu. Everybody have a great weekend. Convene well, spread the love, start small and
Blessings.
slow. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
you.
It was beautiful. Thank you.